Be ready. Start. It is of utmost importance that in making material statements and setting forth grounds in applications for special leave, care must be taken not to make any statements which are inaccurate, untrue, or misleading. In dealing with applications for special leave, the court naturally takes statements of fact and grounds of fact contained in the petitions at their face value, and it would be unfair to betray the confidence of the court by making statements which are untrue and misleading. That is why we have come to the conclusion that in the present case, special leave granted to the appellant ought to be revoked. Accordingly, special leave is revoked and the appeal is dismissed. The appellant will pay the cost of the respondent. The principle that a person who does not come to the court with clean hands is not entitled to be heard on the merits of his grievance, and in any case such person is not entitled to any relief, is applicable not only to the petitions filed under Articles 32, 226 and 136 of the Constitution, but also to the cases instituted in others courts and judicial forums. The object underlying the principle is that every court is not only entitled but is duty bound to protect itself from unscrupulous litigants who do not have any respect for truth and who try to pollute the stream of justice by resorting to falsehood or by making misstatement or by suppressing facts which have a bearing on adjudication of the issues arising in the case. A mere reference to the order dated 2nd May 2003 and passant in the order dated 24th July 2006 does not serve the requirement of disclosure. It is not for the court to look into every word of the pleadings, documents, and annexures to fish out a fact. It is for the litigant to come up front and clean with all material facts, and then, on the basis of the submissions made by learned counsel, leave it to the court to determine whether or not a particular fact is relevant for arriving at a decision. Unfortunately, the petitioners have not done this and must suffer the consequence thereof. It appears to us that another factor that weighed with the High Court in this regard was the submission of the learned assistant government pleader that the Charity Commissioner had received an offer higher than that given by respondent number 1. Therefore, it is quite clear that due to the passage of time, mainly because of the flip flop of the trustees and the petitioners, the value of the trust land had increased considerably. In these circumstances, it would be in the best interest of the trust if the maximum price is available for the trust land from the open market. While this may or may not have been a consideration before the High Court, it is certainly one of the considerations before us for not interfering with the order passed by the High Court, even though it may have, in a loose sense, overstepped its jurisdiction. Section 36 of the Act clearly provides that the trustees may be allowed by the Charity Commissioner to dispose of immovable property of the trust with regard being had to the interest, benefit, or protection of the trust. It cannot be doubted that the interest of the trust would be in getting the maximum for its immovable property. We cannot conclude without observing that property of such institutions, religious or charitable institutions or endowments must be jealously protected. It must be protected for a large segment of the community has beneficial interest in it. That is the reason d'etre of the Andhra Pradesh Charitable and Hindu Religious Institutions and Endowments Act itself. The authorities exercising the powers under the Act must not only be most alert and vigilant in such matters but also show awareness of the ways of the present day world as also the ugly realities of the world of today. They cannot afford to take things at their face value or make a less than the closest and best attention approach to guard against all pitfalls. The approving authority must be aware that in such matters, the trustees or persons authorized to sell by private negotiations can, in a given case, enter into a secret or invisible underhand deal or understanding with the purchasers at the cost of the concerned institution. Those who are willing to purchase by private negotiations can also bid at a public auction. Why would they feel shy or be deterred from bidding at a public auction? Why then permit sale by private negotiations which will not be visible to the public eye and may even give rise to public suspicion unless there are special reasons to justify doing so? Thank you.